Today I'm going to answer the question, how much does it actually cost to move to Australia, specifically on a working holiday visa? This was kind of fun to break down. I looked at every single transaction that I spent from when I flew to Sydney and through the whole time I lived in both Sydney and Northern Queensland from 2023 to 2024. And I actually started with my flight and visa cost before that. So this is a reflection on how expensive things are, what it costs to live here and do things here, but also just like specifically what I spent my money on as a backpacker. It was kind of painful, I can't lie. Now, I want to make a note first because cost of living right now in Australia is crazy. A lot of people are going through hardships here, not able to afford things. A lot of people can't buy houses. So this isn't a reflection of, I guess, an actual like permanent resident or someone from Australia. This is a reflection of someone paying only 15% in taxes as a backpacker who only is responsible for themselves. So just keep that in mind as you watch this. This is more just how much the things I specifically spent money on were. I'm gonna say everything in Australian dollar. Okay, so let's get into it. Starting with the flight from the United States, from Ohio to Sydney. That was $1,560. My first working holiday visa, that was about $500. I saved roughly 7,700 Australian dollars to bring with me. And the spending actually starts in the airport because you're flying for 24 hours. $63 for food and drinks in the airport and $55 on headphones. Now, once I got to Sydney in August 2023, this is what I spent in 4 months. A hostel for a week, rent in a house for 10 weeks was $3,994. My phone plan was $334. My travel health insurance, $279. Health bills like medicine and doctor's appointments, $292. My RSA and printing my resume for work was $136. My public transportation and Uber costs like bus, train, ferry, $807. Hobbies like workout classes, going to the movies, going to events, that was $718. Food and drink, including groceries and eating out and going to the bars, $3,993, which was also the same as rent. And everything else like clothes, hair, facial, nails, laser hair removal. I was also doing tattoo removal. So that was $1,823. So in total in Sydney, I spent $12,592.41. Adding in the flight to Sydney and the visa was $14,753. If you take out the $7,700 that I saved up, if I did my math right, that's $7,053 that I spent from what I was actually making working in freshwater, Sydney, Australia at an acai shop. That was doable. I was making anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a week, paying 15% in taxes. So in 4 months, I was able to sustain that spending. When I looked back, I couldn't believe how much I spent on drinks and going out. I mean, it was like in the transactions like every single weekend. I mean, I think probably 1K of that food spending was actually on alcohol at the bars. I was just kind of in my party era, but that's how I socialized. Like me and my friends worked in hospo and that's just what we did. Basically what I did was I allowed myself to spend a certain amount of money each week, depending on how much I made that week, and said, I can spend this, whether it was like $100, $50, $200. I said, I can spend this on whatever I want. So I didn't have to feel guilty. And it was my first time in Australia. So I would never spend that much money on alcohol now, but it was fun when I did. A couple other points I want to make. As far as the food costs, if you're looking at like $3,000, a lot of that was on groceries. Most of it was on groceries. So I didn't go out to eat, really. I mean, if I did, it was like a very special occasion, but I was cooking a lot. Some of the supermarket shopping was also toiletries like toothpaste, hair stuff, shampoo. The thing about Sydney is it's expensive. Rent is expensive. There's so many things to do and things to buy when you're out that it just kind of adds up. It kind of reminded me of how when you live in New York, you walk outside and could easily spend $100. Also, everything's really spread out. So that's why my transportation cost was pretty high. I think these are the types of costs that you don't really think about because if you take a bus, it's not that expensive in Sydney, but if you live in Manly and then you're taking a $10 ferry to the city and back, like that's gonna add up and you don't really know what you're gonna wanna be doing there. My rent there was low for Sydney. To sleep in a bunk bed with my friend for, like I guess it was like it was 10 weeks in that house. And then we also did pet sitting. So we actually stayed in different houses and apartments for free for about a month. So if you're thinking of going to Sydney, add on like at least 1.5K on top of what I spent for a 4-month period. Also, a lot of people when they come here on a working holiday visa, they also are traveling, which I did. But if I was doing all that spending and just working at that acai shop for 16 to 35 hours a week, which that was my schedule, I wouldn't have been able to also support the 2 months of traveling that I did. So I also worked freelance jobs in the States while I was in Australia, and that's how I saved up a few $1,000s USD, which ended up being like 6K AUD, to travel to Tasmania, New Zealand, and Perth within a 2-month span. I don't want you to think that it's realistic to work so casually like I did and then pay for all that while you're living in Sydney and then also save up to travel. So next up is Queensland, and I think this is going to be an interesting comparison because I lived on a remote island in Queensland, so a lot of things were cheaper. I had cheaper rent. I was never going out. I was barely spending money. I wasn't going out to eat. There were no bars really to go out on the island. But random things got really expensive. Like the ferry from Magnetic Island to Townsville, if I wanted to go see a movie or something, you have to pay like $30 just to go there and back. Or the groceries were really expensive because it's remote. So all of that produce and everything had to be shipped in to the island for 2 grocery stores. So eating out and buying groceries was just as expensive. Once I added all this up, it actually ended up being pretty comparable to Sydney, maybe cheaper in some ways. Once I got there, I was back to $0, and it took me a month to actually get a job and start working. Once I got to Queensland, I had to use my credit card to pay for groceries and everything. When I got to Queensland, it was a slow season, end of February, so there were no hours or business to actually be working. If you don't have like a backup savings that you set up for yourself in your home country, or you're not using a credit card, I think it's pretty normalized in America to have a credit card and just throw things on there as a backup. A lot more than for people here in other countries. As I'm talking to them, they seem smarter about that. If you don't have that backup, like you could be shit out of luck. You always need a backup savings fund. Here we go. Let's go to Magnetic Island, Queensland. I was there from the end of February 2024 to the end of July. So this is a 5-month period, which is longer than Sydney. My flight from Tasmania to Queensland was $431. My Airbnb for the first 2 weeks that I split with a friend, for me it was $320. Rent in a house for 20 weeks was $5,000. Utilities $183. Phone plan $175. Transportation, which was the ferry and taxis for the mainland, and then buses and scooters on the island, that was $1,124. Hobbies like workout classes, going to the movies and events, $498. Food and drink, including groceries and going out, $4,506. Health stuff like medication, $166. Everything extra, toiletries, clothes, hair stuff, getting my hair done, $1,601. Shipped my clothes home, that was a big box shipped to the US, $248, and then travel health insurance was $349. So in total, that was $14,605. So if you look at the differences, I mean, that's pretty close, because if you look at what I actually spent in Sydney, it was like 12.5K. Add on an extra month, this was 14.6. Yeah, and to be honest, like I was very frugal with my spending in Queensland. Now, a couple points about that. Like I said, grocery spending was horrendous. Yeah, the ferry being at least $27 there and back. The thing is like you can choose to not do that stuff, but there were times where I was going just so insane staying on the island and feeling like I needed to get away, because you kind of get like islanditis. I one day was like, I need to go take a ferry and stay in a hotel in Townsville and then come back. So again, costs that you cannot predict. Luckily, like we had a friend that drove us around, but I also, when she wasn't driving, like I had to take the bus to work every day. It was like $20 a week. So there were little things that added up. The other point about when you work somewhere like a remote island is you're not going to have as much work. There was a lot of competition to get a job somewhere. And even when I got a job, there were some weeks I made like $500, because depending on the season, there's either a lot of tourists, so you have a lot of working hours, but if there's no customers, you don't really get to work anywhere. All the businesses on the island were small businesses, so they couldn't just afford to throw people on the roster and pay them out of pocket if they weren't making money. My average weekly paycheck was about $850, but that definitely wasn't every week, like I said. So yes, I was able to cover these costs, and I also did some traveling with what I had left over, like to the Whitsundays and to Cairns, and I did all of that. While it was like winding down to the very last cent, that's when I was in Asia, and yeah, definitely that what I made in Queensland wasn't going to sustain all that travel afterwards. So yeah, that was the first year of living in Australia on a working holiday visa. I'd say I definitely did a lot. There are ways to cut costs from that, but if you are someone who travels like me and wants to do the things that I do, that is what it costs. Yeah, and just keep in mind, like I said, those costs do not include the traveling in between part. This was spending living in those cities. So that total altogether for a year to get to Australia and everything I spent there was $29,458. It's doable if you're working full time. It's always going to offset because if you're working somewhere like Sydney or Melbourne, it's going to be expensive, but you're going to have more work. If you work full time 8 months out of the year, you can definitely afford to live and then also have some left over to travel. Probably not going to leave with a lot of money, but again, look, it depends what you're doing and how much you're working. Like that can change for everybody. But if you're on a working holiday visa, chances are you want to be traveling. So that's why I say do the full 8 months full time so that you can have those other months to really enjoy yourself. The entire year definitely was not funded by just what I made in Australia. I just want you to understand that background so that you can be more realistic about it and understand how expensive it is here as well. Especially like that trip to Perth. I mean, I probably spent $2K on that. Also, I know a lot of more backpackers are more frugal than I was. That I think is also my first impression of cost in Australia. With where I'm at now and the jobs I was doing on a working holiday visa, would I be able to buy a house and support a family on that? No. As a mid-20s solo traveler, can I make it work? Yes. I think that it's interesting because Australia is really expensive. But then when I came from the US, my impression was like, oh my gosh, I have money left over to buy clothes. That concept was a little crazy to me. I think that while in some cities, Australia cost of living is bad, in the States, it's just as bad or worse, depending on where you're at. I mean, the rate of homelessness in Australia is way lower than in the US. There's a lot of backpackers, a lot of people who don't spend money on the things that I spend money on. And there's a lot of people who spend way more than that. I think if you're thinking of moving to Australia or doing a working holiday visa, just take all those things into account. In my next video, I'm going to tell you how much it cost me to actually move from the United States to Adelaide as someone who wants to stay here longer than just a year working holiday visa. The cost of relocating is way different than just coming here as a backpacker and wanting to feel more stable. So that's why I'm doing a separate video for that. If you have questions or want to share your experiences with costs in Australia, comment below. And yeah, I will see you next time. Bye.